Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about something that I just spent the last 45 minutes talking about, but I forgot to press the record button. So, we're going to start this all over again, talking about loneliness. Loneliness is such a waste of time. Love that song, Solomon Burke. Don't you ever have to walk alone. It's such a good song. Take my hand, come on and walk with me. So, loneliness. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm setting this up to do an interesting thing, I think. So, ChatGPT is all over the place. AI is all over the place. There's all kinds of interesting things that's happening with it and scary things that are happening with it, and people are using it in all kinds of interesting and impactful ways. Well, I've noticed a few of my friends have gotten really smart with it. I never even thought to do this, but when they have questions, they just ask ChatGPT. If they want to do research on something, they just ask ChatGPT. And I always forget that that's a thing. I'm a PubMed kind of guy. I'm a Sci-Hub kind of guy. That's when I do my research. I'll go to Google and then I'll go to Bing and I'll pop around looking for stuff and use a bunch of different keywords. But ChatGPT does all of that for you. So I'm thinking that this is a great way, and this is how I set this podcast up. I'm going to do a series where I just ask ChatGPT about things that matter. Right? That's what this podcast is. We speak plainly about things that matter. And the theme of this podcast is life after trauma. So, what things matter in life after trauma? Well, I mean, life is traumatic. So life after trauma is really just life, as far as I'm concerned. And today, the thing that we're going to talk about is loneliness. So with ChatGPT's ability to crawl the entire internet the way that Ask Jeeves used to, I don't know if y'all are old enough. I'm definitely dating myself here by talking about Ask Jeeves. Ask Jeeves, when I was in middle school, was a brand new online internet computer search engine where you could type in a question into Ask Jeeves, and he would answer your question in kind of a narrative style format. Well, now ChatGPT does the same thing, but way better. At least we hope so. So I asked ChatGPT to help build me an outline on loneliness. I said, all right, ChatGPT, build me a podcast outline on loneliness. And it was a really fucking boring outline, but whatever. I asked it to fill out a few things in the outline. And I'm doing this as an experiment to see how complete is the information in ChatGPT, because it's going to be relatively correct, right? Because it's pooling the entire internet. And just because something's on the internet, we all know that doesn't make it true. But we also all pretty much agree that if something is a yes on the internet in a bunch of different places, there's a decent chance of it being true. So what we're going to do is we're going to move through the concepts that ChatGPT has for loneliness. And I'm going to give you the human piece at the end, because all of the information on ChatGPT, or most of it, is going to be correct and it's going to be useful, but it's also going to be woefully incomplete. And so this is not just a way for me to be able to have content that I can put out that I think is going to be beneficial to folks, but it's also a way for me to prove, at least to myself and hopefully to people listening, why the human touch is always going to be the most valuable aspect of anything, and why, no matter how advanced AI gets, we're going to need human stuff. So, let's talk about loneliness. It says to do an introduction. We've already done that. But what we haven't done yet is talk about what loneliness is. So the overall, what we're going to talk about today, we've already done the introduction. We're going to talk about what exactly is loneliness, the types of loneliness and causes of loneliness. Then we're talking about the impacts of loneliness, the health, physical and mental. And we're going to talk about the social and economic effects of loneliness. Then we're going to talk about coping with loneliness. We're going to give you some strategies according to ChatGPT of how to deal with loneliness. So also strategies from the internet, because each of these were all sourced from one place or another. And after we talk about coping with loneliness, we're going to talk about overcoming loneliness, which when I asked, there was a lot of overlap. It was mostly the same. So, and then it says that I should do a conclusion. So clearly asking ChatGPT to build a podcast outline for me is relatively useless. It says to do and I've done this before. I've asked it. It has helped. It has on multiple occasions helped me build an outline for the podcasts. I just almost never wind up using them because it's so generic and basic. And we're going to see that we have a similar issue when it comes to what it tells us to do about loneliness. So anyway, it just says, introduction, what is loneliness, the impact, coping, overcoming, and conclusion. That's the suggestions that it had. So it is a good idea, though, to start with, what is loneliness? What is our definition of loneliness? And honestly, the definition of loneliness, if you just ask Google, is utter garbage. So before I give you the definition of loneliness, I want you to sit and I want you to think about the last time that you were really lonely. Think about a time that you felt really lonely. I want you to think about that time, and I want you to soften your body. I want you to relax your body just a little bit. If you're driving or whatever, maybe don't do all this, but relax your body a little. And remember, just think about being there again, in that time, in that place, in that situation where you felt lonely. That feeling that you have in your body right now, that's loneliness. Keep that in mind, because that feeling is what we're talking about, that has all of these incredible negative or deleterious impacts on the body. So remember that, because the Oxford definition, I'm not fucking playing with you. The Oxford definition for loneliness is sadness because one has no friends. Sadness because one has no friends. Or number 2, the quality of being unfrequented and remote, isolation. That's the definition that the Oxford Dictionary has for loneliness. Wow. So if you do a quick Google around, ChatGPT or not, and you just ask about loneliness, you're going to see all kinds of stuff, because we are in a loneliness epidemic by lots and lots of standards and measures. There's a bunch of people who have made it their career to study loneliness and the impacts of loneliness. And there's lots of off-the-cuff factoids that many people know about loneliness, about how married people live longer, and a lot of that seems to be related to loneliness. But that's the definition. So that's what we're working with as far as what Oxford says, which is why, again, think about that feeling that you have. The better that you can describe that feeling, the better off you'll be when you're talking to people. But I think people understand the physiological sensation of loneliness. I think we get it because we have all felt it. And we've all felt it because we are a profoundly social species, which is why loneliness has such horrible impacts that we'll get to in a second. But before we get to the impacts, let's talk about the different types of loneliness. So the different types of loneliness are broken down into emotional loneliness, which is a lack of meaningful relationships, according to them. There is social loneliness, a perceived lack of quality social connections. Then there is existential loneliness. And existential loneliness is a feeling of deep separation from others and the entire world. That's the existential crises are what Gen Z is famous for because, well, the world's burning around them as they're growing up. And then there is transient loneliness, which I find hilarious because loneliness is an emotion. And emotions do what? They come and go. They ebb and flow. That's what they do. So when they say transient loneliness, it kind of makes me laugh because that's all loneliness. Until you get to that type of loneliness that never, ever goes away, and we call that depression, which is one of the impacts of loneliness. So let's get there. Now you know what loneliness is, and you know what types of loneliness there are, which I find interesting, and we'll break those down a little bit more in a second. Then there is the causes of loneliness. So I asked ChatGPT to break it down. What are the causes of loneliness according to the interwebs? And it says that it comes from many contributing factors. There's lots of variables, but most of them are situational, and those can be like physical isolation or moving to a new location or getting a divorce. The death of a person or a significant person in our lives can be another reason that we feel lonely. It can cause, and loneliness can actually cause, and loneliness can be a symptom of a psychological disorder such as depression, which is where we got to loneliness that is not transient is a sign of depression. And loneliness can have a wide array of negative effects on our health. And I think this is really important because, to me, I view everything from the lens of biology. We are biological beings. We are biological creatures having a human experience. But the biology that we exist in is that of the third hairless chimpanzee. So, isolation, we know, leads to alcohol and drug misuse. It leads to altered brain function, like semi-permanent altered brain function, Alzheimer's disease and its progressions. It leads to antisocial behavior, which is very interesting because we talk about antisocial behavior leading to loneliness, but what we don't talk about is loneliness leading to antisocial behavior, and that to me is much more interesting. We know that it causes an increased risk in cardiovascular disease and in stroke. It causes decreased memory and learning. That is very interesting to me. Decreased memory and learning. I have talked in this podcast before about some of the prerequisites of learning, and one of them is a felt sense of safety. And I think it's very hard for us to feel safe when we feel disconnected from other people because we're such a social species. It has been our connection with our community that has sustained us and kept us alive and built the world that we live in now. So makes sense to me that without those connections that we would actually have a hard time with memory and learning. I also think that that's interesting that there's this thing of isolation, memory, and learning, or loneliness, decreased memory and decreased learning, because that's going to have a lot to do with the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the guy in charge of filing away memories and doing that sort of thing. And we know that chronic stress adaptation causes a shrunken hippocampus. It causes the hippocampus to not work as well, and we have a hard time making new memories, which helps to keep us in that kind of traumatized state where we're always bracing, trying to prevent an instance that had happened in the past, rather than making a bunch of new memories that can eventually outweigh the weight of the traumatic experience. We have a hard time doing that because the hippocampus is small. Isolation makes that worse. The last is depression and suicide. That's a pretty powerful list. alcohol and drug misuse, altered brain function, Alzheimer's, antisocial behavior, cardiovascular disease, stroke, decreased memory and learning, depression, and suicide. That's some problems. And we know that married people live like 10 years longer or something like that. All of it due to loneliness, or the living longer, a lack of loneliness. So I find it interesting here that, and worth pointing out, that the first thing on this list is alcohol and drug abuse or misuse. We know how addicting things like cocaine are, and we've known for a long time. And one of the ways that we first found out, other than people being addicted to it, is through rat studies. They took mice and they took rats and they put them in cages, and they gave them little levers that they could push, and then they could stab themselves in the butt and get a little injection of cocaine and have a great old cocaine-filled day. And they did this. They did this to both heroin and cocaine, actually, in different studies at different times by different people. But what is so interesting is they took those rats, and they, like, some of them killed themselves. They, like, died of overdoses because all they wanted to do was do more drugs. They just wanted to do more cocaine, and they wanted to do more heroin. Cocaine, specifically, is one of the most addictive drugs in the world. It's also incredibly powerful. And we can, like, the way that cocaine works is very interesting. I don't know if this is off subject, but we're going to talk about it anyway, because the way cocaine works is it blocks dopamine receptors in the brain from reabsorbing dopamine. So in the same way that SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, cocaine is a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And what that means is then we have a ton of dopamine flooding around in our brain, and it just keeps producing more dopamine while we're on the cocaine, and it doesn't ever get reabsorbed. So we just get more and more and more dopamine floating around in our synapses, and eventually in the rest of us as well. And it feels incredible. But then our body's made so much dopamine and none of it's been reabsorbed. Then when the cocaine wears off and it starts to get reabsorbed, your body's already spent itself trying to make enough dopamine that your brain and body does absorb it, not recognizing that the cocaine had blocked that reabsorption, which is why the next day or the day after you feel like utter shit, is because your body's not capable of making dopamine anymore. And you've got to go through that lull of desire is not a thing, because that's what dopamine feels like, is desire. So anyway, that's the way that cocaine works. And that's how we found out that cocaine and heroin were obviously super addictive. But then about 15 years later, some folks were like, you know, those rats are pretty fucked up. Maybe, just maybe, if they had like a real life and weren't just isolated in little cages, and they had like things to do and friends and social structures and all of that, if the mice weren't quite as lonely, then what happens? So they rebuilt the studies, and they put the same levers in there with the same dosages of heroin and cocaine, and they let mice go at it again. And turns out it's crazy. It's totally crazy. They do not wind up being addicted. So I find this really powerful because cocaine is super addictive. It's known as like the most addictive drug in the world, and cocaine gets turned into crack, and you got to do, and it's got this horrible, horrible connotation to it. But really, what these follow-up studies prove to us is that as bad for individuals and community as like crack cocaine was, that's not nearly as bad as isolation is. Because without the isolation, we wouldn't be addicted to crack cocaine, or to heroin. I literally mean that. Loneliness seems to be a part of the factors that make us addicted. Which is why the very first thing on that list that ChatGPT gave us was alcohol and drug misuse. That's one of the wide-ranging negative impacts that it has, because loneliness has negative impacts on our brain because we are such highly social creatures. The creatures with the largest prefrontal cortexes have the largest social groups. So guess which mammal has the largest prefrontal cortex? Humans, because we have the largest social groups. And if we are isolated and we're not activating those those parts of our brain that help us in social situations, then those very expensive parts of our brain, and by expensive I mean the amount of calories and energy that the prefrontal cortex consumes, it's a lot. They consume a lot. The prefrontal cortex consumes a lot of calories. And if it is not being used, everything in biology is use it or lose it. And then we start to lose our ability to cognate, because the way that we navigate social situations is typically we're trying to do it consciously. And that conscious intervention and that conscious suppression of our more limbic reactions is done by different aspects, depending on what needs to be done, of the prefrontal cortex. It might be the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it might be the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, but it's all done by the prefrontal cortex. And we're supposed to be doing a lot in the prefrontal cortex. That's why we have the largest one, and it's because of that giant social thing. So with isolation, we use our brains less, and then they deteriorate, and that's how we get things like Alzheimer's. So these are the things that I can add as a human being who has studied and researched this information and can think creatively that ChatGPT cannot come up with. They can just give you a list of things, but without connecting it to the why, to me, it's just it's just a bullet list and it doesn't mean anything. So here's where I really want to pull away from ChatGPT. But first, in order to do so, I need to tell you everything that ChatGPT told me. So I asked ChatGPT, because this is what people can do. You can just ask the internet now, how do I deal with my loneliness? And that's what a lot of people are going to do, because lonely people wouldn't feel lonely if they felt that they had a bunch of friends that they could ask these kinds of questions to, right? So ask ChatGPT, what can I do about my loneliness? What are some strategies that I can use to help me cope with my loneliness? Strategy number 1 from ChatGPT is join a club or a group. It says that joining a club or group that shares your interests can help you meet new people and form meaningful connections. And it also provides a sense of belonging and purpose, which speaks directly to that emotional loneliness, because emotional loneliness was about the lack of meaningful relationships. So joining a club or a group is, according to ChatGPT, a great way to help deal with that one. Now, I didn't tie those two together. I'm just tying them together from what it says in the little smaller, in the little breakdown. Number 2, volunteer. You can volunteer to become a part of a new group. And this all makes sense, right? These are standard suggestions. Go outside, go join a group, join a club. And that makes sense. Volunteering goes directly to that social loneliness, because you get to be around other people who hopefully you don't hate. This is a good one for me. There's a couple places that I volunteer here. I volunteer at the Washington Trails Association, and I volunteer there's a local salmon foundation that I volunteer with as well. And we go plant trees and shrubs and native plants in places where the salmon where they're trying to get the salmon to go back up the rivers, because we dammed them and things to make power for everybody and all that. So they're trying to get the habitat back in place for the salmon, and they have people come out and help volunteer to do that. That's a really fun way for me. If I am feeling lonely, it's the last thing that I want to do, but I know that I should do it. And luckily, I grew up in a way and have that kind of instilled in me that sometimes, not always, but sometimes there are times where it's just I don't want to, and I can still kick myself in the teeth enough to make myself go do it. And that's been a great one, especially with WTA. That one wound up so much fun. That's the Washington Trails Association. I do lots of volunteering with them, trail building, and it's marvelous. Some of my closest friends out here on the Olympic Peninsula I've met through the Washington Trails Association. And that is a great way to deal with loneliness, so long as your loneliness isn't too bad. Next, it says to practice self-care, which, sweet, okay, fine, practice self-care. But what does that do for your loneliness? Huh? ChatGPT, what does that do for your loneliness? How does staying alone but making your time alone more pleasant, how does that deal with your loneliness? But then again, this is ways to cope with loneliness. So I guess that is understandable. It is not going to fix your loneliness, but it is a way to cope with loneliness, is to do self-care, whatever that means for you. I did make a post a while back that part of the reason self-care is so hard is because self-care actually, if you're honest, looks a whole lot like self-discipline. But we'll leave that aside for now. Practice self-care is suggestion number 3 for how to cope with loneliness. Number 4 from ChatGPT is try online therapy. Online therapy, such as Talkspace, BetterHelp, allows you to regain some control. There is a group online on YouTube and on Reddit that I love because I love the guy who runs it all. His name is Dr. G. He's the healthy gamer. I've talked about him on here before. He does phenomenal work. He's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who was also like a total nerd and as close to a dropout as he could be, being from an Indian family. And like he had to go redo a bunch of classes just to be able to get in to medical school because he didn't have a high enough GPA. He didn't apply himself because he was a gamer. And now he started this show on YouTube called The Healthy Gamer, and they have a whole collection of followers who are incredible. And he's really thorough and marvelous, and he's compassionate, but he's empathetic and empathetic, but also like is very honest and doesn't try to dumb things down and tells it like it is, but also tries to do it in a compassionate way. And I really like him because he takes things as far as like he uses the science and takes the science as far as it can go. And then with his Indian background, he goes to the yogic scriptures because he also spent some amount of time living in an ashram or whatever. And with his Indian heritage, goes to that. And he's really phenomenal at helping people, lay people, figure out their life, some of which you might need clinical intervention. And he makes a clear distinction between that. But the group that he has started, he's created a bunch of coaches that I think is phenomenal to help other people online on this healthy gamer community so they can help each other. You know, if there are little things about self-esteem or whatever, that he's got people that he's trained to help other people with that. And that, I think, is probably the single most powerful thing, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But online therapy, that's an option. That's a good one. Thank you, ChatGPT, for that. I think people can try to do that. The hard part is that is kind of a like, okay, great, but how do you actually get into a therapist? Like, you can find coaches and things eventually, but it's hard. How do you find a therapist? And that therapist, by the way, is also not going to solve your loneliness. Hopefully your therapist can help you figure out a few things that will, in a secondary way, solve your loneliness. But getting a therapist is not going to solve your loneliness for the same reason that getting a hooker isn't going to solve your loneliness. Neither one of them are going to solve your loneliness because in your heart of hearts, you know you had to pay cash money for it. You know that the reason that they sit there and listen to you so carefully is because you paid cash money. And you know that the reason they told you you're so hot and called you daddy is because you paid cash money for it. So it's not going to solve it directly, but it can solve a few things indirectly by, hopefully, if you have a good therapist, they can help you navigate a few things and figure some stuff out. And the next one is connect with others. It seems redundant at this point, which is something that continues to happen with ChatGPT. It just repeats itself over and over again in different ways. But hey, that's what the internet does as well. So we can't be too surprised. And suggestion number 7 for how to cope with loneliness is practicing mindfulness. And I actually really like this one. I think practicing mindfulness is a marvelous way to cope with loneliness because it reduces our stress overall and reduces our reactivity overall. But again, it doesn't deal with loneliness directly. So how do we deal with loneliness directly? And this is where ChatGPT is over. I asked ChatGPT, what is loneliness? Build me an outline for a podcast on loneliness. What are the types? What are the solutions? Give me the down and dirty. And man, was that weak. Because there's a few things that are really important about loneliness that we're learning from new studies that apparently haven't made it into the general population's understanding of loneliness, at least not the general internet's understanding of loneliness. So the thing that all of this stuff has in common as far as these suggestions for how to deal with loneliness, they all just say, go out and join a club, go be social. But how many times have you felt alone in a crowded room? Have you? Have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? I definitely know that I have. I've definitely felt alone in a crowded room. So just being around people doesn't solve it. So if loneliness is not just being around people and it's not just not having friends, because I know people, including myself, who have had friends and still felt very, very lonely. So there's two things I want to say here that differ from what the general population or even the practitioners are going to say. One, some will agree with me on because the new studies are all pointing in this direction. The new studies on loneliness say that when we tell people to go join a club or to go out, talk to somebody in the grocery store, in the line, little ways that we can try to be more social, they don't work. Even mindfulness doesn't work. It doesn't work for loneliness. So what does? If all of these suggestions are great suggestions and they make perfect sense in theory, and they do, some more than others, but they all make sense in theory. They all seem like really good suggestions. What are you supposed to do? You can go join a club and you can go meditate and you can go spend time with friends. You can call a friend when you're feeling lonely and be like, hey, I'm feeling lonely. But we've done enough studies on these now to find out that people aren't actually feeling better because of it. So what can we do? Well, there's data, but there's data about different ways, but none of it's conclusive except for one. The conclusive data is if you want to feel less lonely, then you need to put your loneliness aside and you need to reach out to somebody else and you need to help them with their issues. You need to ignore your own loneliness. That's how you solve loneliness, not by ignoring it and doing nothing, but by ignoring it and actively doing something for someone else. Because here's the thing. I'm all about independence. I'm all about autonomy. But there's one thing that we definitely cannot solve alone. And that's loneliness. We can't solve it for ourselves. We can't solve loneliness ourselves. What we can do, and this has been played out in the data, we can go help somebody else. When you're feeling lonely, go help your mom put quarter round in the house that she's selling. Go help your sister go shopping. Go help your buddy find a new girl. You know, whatever it is that you can do for someone else, that is actually played out by the data, the newest anyway, what we can do that is the single most beneficial thing. It's literally that simple. I could try to go deeper, but I don't think I need to because it's literally that effing simple. In order to fix our loneliness, We have to do things for other people. We cannot fix loneliness ourselves. Not for ourselves. But we as a group can fix loneliness. And the way that we do that is by doing it for other people. We can't solve our own loneliness, but we can solve someone else's. And that's called social currency. There's lots of types of social currency, and one of the types that pisses me off it's the only type I wind up talking about is like what's happening in popular, like pop culture and all the new movies and TikTok trends and memes. That's all social currency. Things that allow you to maintain and have fun, superficial social connections. That's social currency. And when you help other people through their problems, that is some seriously powerful social currency. You think sending a funny meme to a friend is helpful. Try actually being there for somebody when they need you. Beyond that, try being there for somebody without them asking. See how that changes things. Not just for them, but for you. You are investing in your worth when you do this by making you have more worth or more value to other people because you have brought other people value. So if you're lonely and chronically lonely even, the single best thing that you can do is go, okay, I'm lonely. And then not need to act on that, not focus on that, and not try to go to somebody else and say, hey, I'm lonely, talk to me. Because then if it were me, I know that I'm going to go straight into, well, now they're in hooker/therapist territory and they're only helping me because they're my friend and I asked them to. And now it's an exchange and that's weird. We have social currency. It's very clear. And it feels weird when we make that subconscious reality conscious. And there are times that it's gross when we do that. And there are times that it's less gross. And I think helping our friends is a really great way for us to add social currency to our value. And it help everybody. So there you go. That's that. The last thing I want to say is we can't solve loneliness on our own. It has to be a group effort. And this speaks right to parts of Rethinking Broken, in my estimation. Trauma is almost always relational. So much of our trauma happened in a dynamic of a meaningful relationship. Whether that meaningful relationship be an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or mom or uncle or cousin or sister or bully, there was some kind of significant and meaningful relationship that hurt us. And those of us who are chronic stress adapted or have plenty of developmental trauma, meaning your childhood was stressful. I don't care what kind of stress. If your childhood was stressful, you are predispositioned to be a certain type of way. And I call that way chronic stress adapted, especially those of us who were injured by our parents and who wasn't. The more injured you are by your parents, the less reason biologically, like straight up, the most rational, plain biological way, the less reason biologically that you have to invest in relationships. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if your relationship with your mother and your father are garbage or were garbage, like mine was for a long time, I just didn't invest heavily in relationships. I was always much more invested in me and my own value system and living according to what I thought was important because, well, the people that I needed most and that were supposed to love me most abandoned me, didn't care about me, didn't treat me well, didn't make me feel like I was worth spit to them. So why would I invest in future relationships if the people who were supposed to love me most treated me like garbage and didn't do any of the things that moms and dads were supposed to do in my head? Why the fuck would I invest in relationships? So now let's move forward 20 years. why invest in relationships now? If they didn't do it back then, why would I do it now? And the answer is I wouldn't. And so if I'm not invested in relationships, and I don't have very many meaningful relationships because most of them I just don't believe to be worthwhile, guess what symptom I'm going to have? What emotion I'm going to have? Loneliness. Because it's isolation. We've isolated ourselves. And even if we're a social type of person, like me, I was a very social type of person without investing in any of those relationships. That's the social butterfly. That's those people who are wild and fun and like, especially in our early 20s and even into our mid and late 20s, are wild and fun and you're everywhere and they know everybody and everybody loves them, but nobody really knows them because they were injured deeply by the people who were supposed to know them and love them most. So they stave off loneliness. They cut off the meaningful aspects of those connections while fostering the superficial aspects so we can stave off the loneliness. So for those of us with developmental trauma, specifically trauma that comes from our parents, if our parents made us feel less than, we're not going to want to invest in relationships as much as other people. We are instinctually going to invest less into all relationships than our less traumatized counterparts. So that makes climbing out of this loneliness hole that much harder. That is the other key to me. I said this was going to be the last thing. I'm going to add one more. And this hopefully will tie the last two together. And it's about loneliness and anxiety. I think this injury to our concept of relationships, that is the heart of loneliness to me in our modern world. Maybe it's different other times, whatever. Right now, which all that fucking matters, it's our relationship to relationships. It is our concept of our relationships that has taken the biggest hit, and that is driving the loneliness epidemic that is causing people to, like, I don't know if you know this, but old people are dying younger. And millennials, it looks like we're supposed to live shorter than our boomer counterparts, and they're already dying younger than the generation before them. Like, we're on our way down, bro. Like, all across the board. And I think a huge portion of it is because of this injury that was caused in our early life. And we forgive like most of us, depending on how bad the stuff is, but most of us forgive our parents because they're our parents. And like, okay, you hurt us, but then we carry that hurt with us for the rest of our lives. And of course we do. It's printed in our neurobiology. So of course we carry that with us. But if we don't address our concept of relationships, then we're screwed, because that to me is what's driving this. And the reason I say this is, again, think about being alone in a crowded room. Have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? I know that I have, so it's not just about the relationships. So now you're alone in a crowded room. Say that you actually start to feel better. Say your loneliness abates. Say it's not too crowded. Say it's the perfect amount of crowded for you. You show up, you're like, I'm feeling lonely. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to walk downtown and go to the kava bar, and I'm going to sit and just try to be around other people because I'm really not feeling it right now. You go downtown, you walk down, you walk into the bar, you get your drink, you're holding there, and what happens to the loneliness? It might stay the same. It's probably not going to get worse. It might get worse, in which case we turn around and go home. But more likely, okay, our loneliness starts to fade, and that feels good at first. But then what happens? That loneliness is often then replaced as if you picture a bar graph, you've got loneliness up here on the left and you've got anxiety really low on the right. As your loneliness fades, the anxiety raises. And this is where we get into clinical depression or clinical loneliness in my head. And that is caused by our relationship to relationships, which was caused by the trauma of our early life. because now you might be around people and you're feeling less lonely, but now you're around all of these people, and that gives you anxiety because you don't know how to navigate those relationships. And until we become socially and relationally competent, we're fucked. So that's my advice to you. My advice is, if you struggle with loneliness, if you're feeling lonely, and I wanted to bring this up in the holidays because it's a great time to feel lonely. If you're feeling lonely, the best thing that you can do is not try to solve your loneliness, but try to solve someone else's problem. Maybe it's their loneliness, but maybe it's just some shit that they need to get done. Maybe it's some repainting. Maybe it's like changing out a starter. Maybe it's pulling up the gutters. Maybe it's just whatever. It doesn't matter. Help somebody else with their shit, and that automatically helps us with ours. And this speaks to the very, very last chapter of Rethinking Broken, which is about service serves CSA people. And I'm not sure it's the exact same reason in here, but the outcome is the same. Service helps. And I put it in the book, service helps us CSA people because other people, other like middle class, wealthy white people, that's about it, have the privilege of a world that has treated them fairly or fairly well. Probably not fairly. Nobody gets treated that fairly. But middle class, rich white people, I can't believe middle class is rich now, but it really fucking is. Middle class, rich white people have the benefit of just being like, oh yeah, no, everything's great. But us chronic stress adapted people, we don't. The world has not been fair to us, and we live with we live with that unfairness showing up every day in our biology. That is like that everyday showing up in our biology shows up in our social isolation and in our concept of what a relationship is or should be or how to navigate them. Having injury to those things, to our concepts of what love is, and that we get love and pain mixed up because we were born into a family where they came from the same place. Other people can get away with being like, oh, the world is mostly okay, and they don't need to do good in it. I am not one of those people. To me, the world's a fucked up place, and I know it because I have to constantly battle my own biology. And that constant battle is a constant reminder of how fucked up the world is, how fucked up my childhood was, and the expectations are, and all of the shit. So me helping other people makes the world a better place because it's hard to talk about how shitty everything is when I'm actively doing good. For me, that's why service serves chronic stress adapted people. Maybe there's something similar in this with loneliness. But I think the thing that's driving loneliness is injury to our concepts of relationships and to what relationships are supposed to mean and supposed to do for us. That injury, because of chronic stress adaptation in early life, drives isolation. It drives a lack of importance on our concepts of relationships. And that drives the loneliness, which then drives more drug abuse and misuse, and it drives Alzheimer's and dementia and memory loss, early death, cardiac disease, and stroke. All of those things come, I think, in addition to all the other stuff, all those situational things like moving and getting a divorce or somebody dying. I think the invisible thing that drives us, which is always what I want to talk about. When I say this is the thing to me that nobody else is talking about. It's never just one thing. It's always and. It's never either or, always and. So even this is the thing. This is the one thing that I'm adding that I don't see anybody else talking about. Dr. G, the healthy gamer guy, talks about how the studies say going out and doing good for other people help. But what nobody else is getting at is, I think, our relationship to relationships, our concept of relationships, when that gets hurt, when our concept of relationship includes pain, that's the problem. That's the problem that drives us. I don't really know how to solve that fully yet, if ever, but there you go. That's my thing on loneliness. So if you want to know anything about loneliness, you can do what I did. You can Google it. You can Google a few definitions. You can ask ChatGPT for some points and ask it to further break down those points. And it's all just empty words to me until you tie it all together. And that's what humans are for. That's what I'm here for, at least hopefully. So thank you for hanging out with me today. If you made it this far into the episode, thank you so much. You're a boss. If you like this episode, leave a comment or a review. Share it with a friend. Loneliness is something that we all suffer with, and the solutions are actually really simple. I've spent the last hour talking about interventions and everything from a million different angles, but really, if you're struggling with loneliness, think about what is your relationship with relationships. When you want to establish a relationship with someone, what are the fears that you automatically have? That's going to give you some insight into it. And the other big takeaway is if you're feeling lonely, rather than trying to solve your own loneliness, just recognize that you can't, but you can solve someone else's. So pick up a phone, call a friend, go help somebody run some errands or something. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.